Good evening all and welcome. Tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Atlas VPN, a tool that encrypts your data and virtual location to keep you anonymous and safe on any device on the web. Right now they actually have a colossal discount for a 3-year deal for only $139 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. So it's a win-win. Check out my link in the description to find out more. Did you know that some platforms geo-block certain films? Like Netflix. I tried to watch John Wick 2 the other day, wouldn't let me, so I had to use my handy Atlas VPN to switch to Romania, where I could watch it in peace. And it's not just Netflix. You can un-geo-block Disney+, Amazon Prime, BBC iPlayer even, and so much more. They also have this fancy feature called Data Breach Monitor. By simply entering your email address, it scans the internet to make sure your data or sensitive info isn't breached, and it will let you know if it has been sold on the dark web. Let's hope not. So don't forget to check out the link in the description to get the $1.39 a month deal for 3 years. It won't last long and is invaluable. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control.
I am a 27-year-old male who, since I recall, there has always been paranormal stories about my house. The first one that I remember are from the family that lived in the house years ago before I was born, as my grandfather built the house. It started with one of my uncles. He said that voices were calling him at any time of day, calling his name, that there would be random cold spots in the house, and that some days he would discover scratches all over his body, some of them with little bits of blood on them, and in places where he wouldn't be able to reach with his own hands. That phenomena continued for years until he went to a spiritualistic person. I don't know what to call it, but it's someone who deals with tarot, cleansing, and that kind of stuff. Let's just stick to spiritual person. He said that there was something attached to him, so he prepared his supplies. He went with my uncle to the back of the house. He tried performing his ritual, but said that it wouldn't be much use from the outside, and that he needed to go in, since the entry was focusing on him. After a little while, my uncle ran off away from the house, and shortly after became a priest. He is currently still operating at his church and talks about his experiences and is now closer to God, and has done so in order to stop feeling followed and observed and to stop hearing voices and feeling the scratches. My grandparents were always skeptical with him, but not my other uncles nor my mother. Another one of my uncles was sleeping on the couch when something grabbed his foot, pulled him awake, and started to drag him through the living room. He told me that he was seeing a large foggy shadow with no legs, only from torso to head, with one extremity holding his foot. He began to scream for help, and that's when his brothers came running into the kitchen, turned the light on, and there was my uncle screaming on the floor. This happened just after my uncle left to become a priest, since he was one of the older ones. My mother is one of the youngest of the children. When she was a teenager, she invited friends to the house to have a sleepover, and when they were all sleeping, a strange sound awoke them. She said that the sound was like someone suffering, being choked, and it was the gagging sound they were making while pleading and gasping for air. She opened her eyes and says that she saw a shining woman enter the room from the wall, floating. She had no body movement. She was still white, floating and displacing through the room. My mother covered her eyes, but with a little peek to notice how the woman was laying horizontally above one of her friends, doing the sound. After a while, the floating woman returned to a vertical position and left the room again through a wall. My mother couldn't resist the crying and told her friends all about it. Another experience from my mother is that one night she was laying in her bed sleeping, when all of a sudden she awoke but was completely paralyzed. Classic episode of sleep paralysis. She couldn't move, and all that she could see was the ceiling. She claims that there were 3 little winged figures flying in circles above her. She described these figures as little naked women who were whispering things, although she could not understand what they were saying. She started praying, and after a while the entities flew into a big mirror in her room. I was a little kid at the time, and I remember how that mirror was covered during some of this event. The stories that I have shared with you are considered true by the people involved. These are only a few experiences that convinced them that there was something in that house, and I believed them. It appeared that the thing that was haunting my uncle started focusing its attention during my youth on me. I tried to explain the scratches on my body with normal things, like I was cutting myself by accident, scratching myself with nails and stuff like that. But it didn't make any sense. It's not like there were any animals that could also harm me or do anything like that to me in the house. Then I realized it couldn't have been me, because the scratches started to appear from nowhere. I felt the pain, looked, and it was there, from nothing. It was an incredibly chilling time of my life. When I was a kid, we lived in a rented house which was on the 3rd floor, and it was the topmost floor. Our home was built on the terrace itself. At night I heard the typical anklet sound almost every night, but as I was a kid no one believed me. Days passed, and one night my father rose from bed and asked me if we heard any sounds. I screamed that I did, and all of us went to the terrace to see if anyone was there. What came as a shock was all the families who were living in that building were on the terrace, and they were all wondering about the sound and where it was coming from. The sound that we'd all heard was no longer there. But once everyone had turned off the lights and returned to bed, did I hear it about an inch from my ear, as did my parents. We were very freaked out, but the sound ceased a few days later. We moved into a new city after that, bought our own house, and that strange sound followed me to my personal room. But after a few days it faded completely. Me and my sister had adjacent rooms. My room was quite a bit bigger than hers, and sometimes felt empty. Every sound echoed. My sister left home for her job in a different city. I took her room as it was the perfect size, with the perfect furniture for my studies. In a few months, some strange things started happening. I was, and still am, a TV show fanatic, and used to watch comedy shows regularly till morning on my laptop. My room was on the 1st floor, and my parents' room was on the ground floor. Soon after the anklet episode, I once heard a very loud thud that came from the terrace. I suspected thieves, so I went to get my baseball bat and sprinted towards the terrace at 3 a.m. It sounded like something jumped and fell hard on the ground. I found no one on the terrace, and it happened every other night. I started ignoring it after a while. Now, as the ghost was losing the game, I was no longer scared. So the ghost decided to play a new trick. Imagine this. Do this now. Press a switch on your electricity switchboard. If you hear the sound, you'll hear a loud tick. The on and off switch, constantly. Imagine 20 switches doing the same thing. How loud it will be in eerie silence. Every night this happened, as I slept in my sister's room. I heard it happening in my room, and every time I went to check, I saw the fan moving and slowly stopped as I entered the room. I always, no matter what, always shut the washroom door closed, and every morning I'd see it open after an hour of me shutting the door closed at 2:30 a.m. Now I got comfortable with this. These things stopped happening, but the craziest part is yet to come. I started seeing numbers in triples. Sometimes we don't turn our gaze to the clock or unlock our phone just for the sake of it. The numbers started to appear together. I saw numbers in triples like 222, 333 and the like. It was driving me mad. The car in front, YouTube views, news, triples all over the place. People pass arguments that my mind wanted to see triples, and that's why I always got fixated on them. Maybe it was my subconscious, maybe it wasn't. But the story had just begun. Every day and every night, I'd wake up at 2:22 or perhaps 3:33 for 6 months. Sometimes I'd check my phone to see what time it was, and it would go from 3:32 to 3:33. Craziest part? I once woke up on the 3rd of March at 3:33 a.m. with my phone battery at 33%. I wish I'd have taken a screenshot. I looked it up. What was happening with me? I remember one more instance. The most dreadful incident of my life. Do you know the faces you see in your dreams? Or the faces you draw in your mind are not your own creation? You've actually seen those faces before, and your brain keeps repeating them. Now I was leaving for school, and I had a really scary dream. I mean, even now I get shivers when I think of it. There was a man in my dream, of medium height, bald, wearing old clothes with dark circles, like a Vanta Black. Next day I was getting my bike out of my house to go to school. The same man who I saw in my dreams was standing in the middle of the road staring at me. He did this for 2 to 3 minutes, and I was petrified, unable to move an inch and unable to scream. Then the man didn't move either. He stared at me for the longest 2 minutes of my life and just turned and walked away. I had a very high fever that day and didn't go to school. Fast forward a few years. I had this feeling for a year now and still have it, that whenever I sleep I feel someone standing near me, over me, and directly looking at me. Even when I'm alone or with a bunch of friends, I always feel the presence of someone I do not know. I moved out of my hometown for my job in the same city my sister moved into. This happened a year ago. I lied on my bed, closed my eyes, wasn't even sleeping, and felt someone yank my hand. I thought I was dreaming, but 2 minutes later someone tightly slapped me on my left cheek, and no one was in the house. I was raised in a 3-room mobile home, and me and my brother shared the master bedroom, because my mum would rent out one room since my dad was no longer with us. My little brother and sister would sleep in the same room with my mum and my mother's boyfriend, since the room that they stayed in was the same size as the master bedroom, except it didn't have a restroom in the room. While growing up, I've always had an open mind for the supernatural world, so sometimes I would see or hear things, and I wouldn't know if what I saw or heard on my own was actually the supernatural, or just my mind playing tricks on me. But everything happened in my room. Sometimes I would ask my brother and my mum if they saw or heard the same thing. My mum would say that she didn't, and that my mind was playing tricks on me, and to not tell my sister or brother because she didn't want me to scare them. On the other hand, my brother would say I were crazy, as he did not believe in the supernatural. But that all changed once they had their own experiences with the paranormal. My mum's experience happened when she was pregnant with my little brother, and I was in junior year of high school. Once I got home from school, my mum was sitting outside waiting for me, and I asked her, "Why are you waiting outside?" She tells me that she got scared inside the house and decided to wait for me out here. My mum tells me that she was home alone cooking, and it was quiet, when out of nowhere she hears a loud bang coming from my room, as if someone dropped my air conditioning. Her first thought was that someone was trying to rob the house, so she grabs the knife and turns off everything, so that they think no one's home, and she waits at the end of the hallway in case they come out. As she waits, she hears noises and footsteps coming from my mum's room, to the point where she hears more than one person. She hears them throwing papers around and knocking down objects, and she starts to get scared, but she tries to stay calm after waiting for 10 minutes. And it gets quiet. And after 5 minutes of pure silence, she gets the courage to open my door, and she hears and sees nothing, just the way I had left my room before I left school. While realizing nothing happened in my room, she realizes that someone tall is standing behind her, and her body is overtaken by sadness and fear, so she starts to break down. She gains the courage to look behind her, and sees that no one's there, and she decides to go outside as fast as she can to wait for me. Nowadays, after I moved out, she tells me that she sometimes hears my voice calling her from a distance while I'm at work, and at night, she sees either an adult sitting on the couch looking at her, or a little kid sitting on the flower throw when no one's there. My brother's experience happened when he was 20, and I was 19, and my other brother had come down from college to visit. It was 11 p.m. while I was at my friend's house. Once I get home, he asked me if I had came home and tell him no, that I was at my friend's house with a group of friends sitting down and chatting, and I ask him what happened. He tells me, "You know, you tell us you heard and saw something and we think you're dumb and going crazy?" He begins to tell me his story, that he was in the restroom doing the number 2, and after a while in the restroom he hears footsteps through the wall, thinking it's me because he heard the door open and then close. He begins to call out my name, hoping that I respond, but it's quiet. But he hears someone inside the room sitting down on the chair rocking back and forth, and keeps calling out to me. He begins to hear someone grabbing at his college homework and throwing it around and ripping it up, so he starts to call me out. He gets angry because he just finished cleaning, and says he hadn't heard someone's voice. He hurried up out of the restroom, only to see the room was perfectly clean and no one was in there. He goes to the kitchen and asked if anyone had went into the room. My mum answered that no one had ever gone over there or near the door. He explains to her what he heard, and ever since then has also believed in the supernatural. While I was growing up, I always heard and saw things, so I've always been a believer, but it never bothered me, and I was never scared of the paranormal. I was 20 years old when I had astro projected the first time that I remember. Me and my girlfriend had 2 pit bulls that lived at my mum's house at the time, and my brother was in college. My girlfriend's shift was from 6:45 a.m. to 3:15. In my case, my schedule was all over the place, so my sleep schedule was messed up. But one of my shifts I worked at night, so I would arrive home at around 6:30 a.m. When I get home, I usually let my mum know I'm going to bed, so she doesn't begin to worry about where I am. As I'm getting ready to sleep, I face the edge, because if I face the wall, I feel someone's presence standing behind me, especially sitting down on my chair. I was asleep. I rolled over, and it turned out to be that my spiritual self had rolled over instead of my physical body. I rolled over and was able to see myself asleep, and the moment my girlfriend walks in and says, "Oh, you're awake," and I ask her, "You're home early. Your manager let you off early?" "Yes," she replies. I look at the time. It's 12 p.m. They would have never let you off this early. She just stares at me and begins to smile, a smile from ear to ear, and begins to transform to her normal self. A long-fingered, long-haired, ugly-looking creature, pimples all over her face. She looked a bit like the witch from the movie Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. She stared at me and smiled, but I wasn't afraid. And then out of nowhere, in the blink of an eye, she was face to face with me, grabbed my arm with her long nails going through my skin, and I began to yell out in pain as she just laughed at me. At that exact moment, the dog heard me, or her, laugh and began to bark loudly. And I woke up. The moment I awoke, I was face to face with the wall instead of the edge of the bed, but then felt this presence behind me. And I knew it was because I saw her face to face, and my dog kept barking. Once the dog stopped, I assumed it scared her off, and I took a look at my arm where she had grabbed me, and saw the marks left by her nails. I told my mum what happened, and she believed me ever since her own encounter. Ever since that day, I now sometimes see people, or hear noises even though no one is around me. I used to rarely have dreams about the future, and nowadays I've been having dreams about some of my family members dying or committing suicide, or me being at their funeral, which I hope none of them come true. Usually my dreams about the future tend to end in reality. I've told my story to people, and they begin to talk to me about a third eye or my sixth sense, but now I'm starting to think that when the demon grabbed my arm, I think she helped me unlock something. Because wherever I go, I feel a presence around, like someone is staring at me from a distance. Or sometimes I'm able to see it from the corner of my eye. When I look, no one's there. People call me crazy, but they can call me whatever they want. They just need to experience it firsthand in order to truly understand and become a believer themselves. I am a woman in my 60s. I come from country redneck farm stock. While I have a good imagination and am very creative, I live firmly grounded in reality with a non-denominational Christian belief system. I grew up knowing spirits were real, both evil and good. I technically don't believe in ghosts, as the shades of dead people floating around doing things, because my belief system says that when you die, you go to one of two places, heaven or hell. I live in a very small neighborhood in Alaska. It's a cul-de-sac with only 5 houses on it. My husband and I have lived here for several decades. At the time, my scary experiences happened, and we were well acquainted with all the neighbors. Times have changed since then, and now we are only passing acquaintances with most of them. It's a quiet neighborhood where everyone respects everyone else's privacy, but will step in to help any time it's needed. As some of you might know, in the summer, Alaska has a great deal of sunlight. At midnight in the summer, it's still light enough out to read a book outside and easily identify things even from a distance. It's like twilight in the lower 48. So many unexplainable things have happened in this neighborhood that I can only choose 3 of the most vivid to tell you. All 3 episodes remain unexplained to this day. The first one occurred during a summer night. It was almost midnight, and I was standing in my backyard having a final cigarette, accompanied by one of my dogs, an elderly, very gentle golden retriever mix. A movement at my neighbor's house caught my eye, and then my little girl growled. That was unusual for her. I looked at my neighbor's house and saw a person wearing blue jeans and a yellow jacket crouching by her car, apparently peering in with their hands cupped to the glass. I stepped forward to ask her what she was doing, worried that perhaps she'd lock herself out, and although I had extra keys to everyone's house, she didn't want to wake me up that late. As I moved forward, The figure straightened up and moved towards the rear of the car. It didn't walk, it flowed. Without the up and down motion of walking, as if it reached the rear of the car, it exploded into a yellow mist and vanished. I stood there stunned. My cigarette burnt down unnoticed while I stared and squinted. I tried to make sense of what had happened. My little dog was pressed against my legs, shivering. Since it was so late, I didn't want to disturb the neighbor, so I went back inside to bed. The next day, I waited until she got home from work, but thought better of saying anything just yet. I needed to try and debunk or explain what had happened. That night, I went out at the same time of night with the same dog, stood in the same spot and lit a cigarette. Nothing happened. Her car stood serenely in place in the last rays of sun setting on it. No figures moved. No bushes were in the way. There was nothing that I could see that explained what happened. The dog was unworried. I eventually told her what had happened, and she wasn't surprised at all. Rather, a bit relieved that someone else had finally seen something. The second episode happened in the winter, where the lighting is the opposite. It's dark most of the day. My pickup truck was parked in our driveway. I had brought several bags of dog food earlier that day. That summer, I had fallen over a dog and broken a finger on each hand, and had just recently had another several surgeries. I went to feed the dogs and realized I had forgotten to bring a bag of dog food in. Being an independent sort, I didn't ask my husband to get the food, but shoved on a coat and some boots and went out to the truck. I'm only 5 feet tall, so getting something out the back of a four-wheeler drive truck isn't exactly easy. I switched on the outside light, walked past our Mustang that was parked in the car spot. I struggled with the tailgate of my truck one-handed and poured the bag of dog food out the back to the ground. As I reached back to close the tailgate, I looked up to see a man wearing jeans and a t-shirt standing beside the Mustang watching me. Of course, I assumed it was my husband who had come out to help, and when I got the tailgate shut, I looked back to make a sarcastic comment about his timing. No one was there. The light was still on. The driveway, carport, and my truck were brightly illuminated. I still thought maybe he'd just gone inside because, winter, and he didn't have any outdoor gear on. I managed to haul the bag to my shoulder and trudge into the house. To my surprise, he was sitting on the couch watching hockey wearing a tank top and shorts, not being outside watching me get dog food wearing jeans and a shirt. The third thing happened during the summer, but it was the daytime. It was hot, and I was in my yard lounging in the shade wearing shorts barefoot. All at once I heard what sounded like a very close gunshot. It echoed off the mountains. I went out through the back gate without stopping to put on shoes as one of my neighbors emerged from her house. We conferred and decided where we thought the shot had come from and began walking in that direction. We noticed another neighbor standing in his backyard, looking in that same direction, so we all went over to speak to him. We were all lightly clad because of summer. To Alaskans, 60 degrees is a heat wave. I was still barefoot. We joined him in his yard and conferred further upon the matter to see perhaps if we needed to offer help to the yet unknown victim. However, there was no further commotion, and we decided it must have been a firecracker or a backfire. And we all three turned at the same time to walk back to the front of the house. Because I was barefoot, I paused for a second to look down to make sure I wasn't going to step on a rock or something, and a strange dreamlike feeling overcame me. I looked up and saw my two neighbors already walking up beside the end of the house. In front of them, I saw another woman oddly dressed in a mid-calf blue denim skirt, knee-high winter boots, and a blue down jacket. My two companions disappeared around the corner, and I followed, expecting to see this third woman, and wondered why she was dressed in winter gear on such a hot day. I was close enough behind them that there's no possible way for her to go anywhere else, except right in front of them. There was no other woman. I looked at both neighbors puzzled and asked, "Did anyone else just walk round the corner, a woman wearing a winter coat?" They both looked at me like I'd grown a second head and said no. We discussed it briefly, but the neighbor who lived there met my eyes and seemed uncomfortable, so I dropped the issue. Later I discussed it with the neighbor I had walked over with, but she had not seen anything and thought perhaps I had seen someone in the distance, but we both knew that that wasn't what happened because there were trees all around us and there's no distance in which anyone can see. It has been years since these things happened, and I still have no explanation. Many other small things have occurred over the years that I can't explain or debunk, but these were the three most dramatic. It was the 4th of July, a Thursday, and my roommate and I decided to go for a bicycle ride. Wednesday happens to be my day off, but since my job does not open for the holiday, I worked that Wednesday, so I would have the same amount of hours for that pay period. I thought it would be nice to go out. After all, I also had 2 free movie vouchers. My roommate has a pickup truck, making it convenient to carry our bikes. We head to an area that is about 30 miles from where we live. It's a beautiful upscale community that has nice roads and the gorgeous scenery that South Florida has to offer. Before I continue, I must sidetrack information to the listener. My boss's dad has recently left on a week-long cruise with his wife. At a certain point during their voyage, he tripped and fell. This caused him excruciating pain, and as a result, his family took him to the doctor where he was given horrible news. He had cancer, and it had spread throughout his body. For some unknown reason, the doctors never caught up to his illness during his regular checkups. Things deteriorated rapidly after that. Last thing I knew, he was being transferred to a different hospital, from West Palm to Miami. I must admit, I'm not that crazy about old people. They can be bitter and complain a lot. However, my boss's dad was a sweetheart and a joker. It was always pleasant to be around him. He was the type of person, just like his son, that everyone got along with. But now back to the story. As I'd said before, my roommate and I had headed out for a bike ride and the movies. We took a long trail along a major road in West Palm. That day being a national holiday, traffic wasn't bad, and I was using a single-speed bike, and I could not keep up with my roommate's 19-speed bike. I stopped, sent him a text, and turned around. We agreed to meet where the truck was parked. I used the same road and stopped at a local Walgreens to buy something to drink. Remember, this is the middle of summer in Florida, and it can be very hot during the day. I continued on my bicycle ride, and when I was nearing a certain spot by a business plaza, a certain feeling fell upon me. It is not easy to explain. It was like a voice, but not in the sense of when you verbalize words to a person. Instead, it was like a voice that seemed to have originated from within me. The voice told me to turn left. Next thing I know, I find myself turning left without even thinking about it. As I reached the parking lot on the plaza, I saw a female gathering shopping carts for the Whole Foods located at the plaza. I smiled and waved at her, and she smiled in return. Then her eyes got real big. 2 seconds later, we heard the most horrible noise of tires squealing and then a loud bang. The sound of twisted metal, and I turned around, and to my surprise there was a car crash. A 4-door Toyota Corolla that was totaled, and an SUV in a really bad shape. For reasons I do not comprehend, they had crashed head-on. What struck me the most was that they had crashed at the very same spot I was about to cross with my bicycle. Needless to say, I would have been crushed between the two vehicles, and I would not have made it out alive. Now, going back to the subject of the old man. The next day, Friday the 5th of July, I returned to work. My boss looked pale and depressed. He seemed distant. Before I even say good morning, he tells me his father had passed away the day before. I ask him what time the old man died, and that's when things got strange. The old man had died a few minutes before I was about to cross that intersection. Coincidence? Maybe. Divine intervention? Well, I'd like to think so. After all, I wouldn't be alive if not for that voice that warned me about the upcoming danger. This experience taught me to always listen to that sixth sense gut feeling, butterflies in your stomach, whatever you want to call it. This feeling is always right, and thus you should listen to it. One day maybe it will even save your life. This man was a good person. Perhaps he was fond of me too, and decided that I was too young to perish. Important things to know. When I go out into my tiny backyard, I can see directly over to a home care center. There is also a forest near me, with a main courtyard that is said to be haunted by 3 ghosts. It's actually really pretty, and have stood there since. I live up north in Denmark, but the building I live in is from 1958, so it isn't that old. There once was a cellar, but it's covered now. We've had the place cleansed twice and it's helped, but I'm sure that the thing is back. Anyway, the night of the 6th of August 2017, me and my then 22-year-old sister, I myself was 15 at the time, were home alone. When we got tired, we went to bed. My mum said we could sleep in her bedroom. My sister fell asleep before me, as I have trouble sleeping, and it doesn't help that I'm a paranoid person. Well, I just laid with my phone when I heard the sound of glass set on the table. My mum always drinks Pepsi Max, so I assumed it was her. Our table was made of marble, so it's also quite a loud sound. Not long after I heard that, the sound of our toilet door locked. I messaged my mum and asked her if she came home earlier than she planned. She said no, and asked why. "Oh, I just thought I heard you," I responded. You see, we have 2 floors. Me and my sister were occupying the top floor, and not more than 10 minutes after, I heard the sound of small children's feet running through the corridor. But I didn't hear anyone go up the stairs. It needs to be said that our stairs squeak a lot, so I would have heard. For a long time, I didn't experience anything. But when I got a boyfriend, it all started up again. But only when he was at my place, every weekend, except the few times we were at his. While I slept, he took my computer and looked through my pictures, but he found something that made him upset. In the evening, he confronted me. I, of course, told him the truth, that I had been in love with him a year before we got together. He had been someone I really wanted to get with, not only for his looks, but for his personality. And he was okay again. He needed to use the loo. So I laid in bed, phone in hand, when I felt something sharp scratching the back of my hand. I immediately felt goosebumps run down my spine, and I knew that when I moved my hand there would be nothing. While that happened in my room, he sat on the toilet, cutting himself, as he had hard depression and is now on pills. So when he came up and sat on my bed, he took a bloody toilet paper out of his pocket. I'm not stupid and confronted him, because he was obviously not okay. I don't remember after that, but I think we made up. Another day and my boyfriend and I were in bed. He apparently looked at me and he asked, "Did you scratch your bum?" "No," I asked. "Why?" "You see, you've got a massive scratch mark." I couldn't find a reason, so I told him everything that had happened. He himself didn't believe in ghosts, but he said he gets extremely depressed when at my place, and he also felt a very weird feeling. I told my mum everything that happened, and after she didn't want me sleeping up there alone, so she made me sleep in the living room with her. After many days of sleeping in the living room, I wanted to sleep upstairs. Once again, I heard the bare feet, but said screw it and tried to sleep. When I fell asleep, there didn't go long until something happened. What sounded like a big man's hands banging on the door. I jumped up and I wanted to go downstairs, but I was so scared. Finally, I got my stuff together and ran downstairs. I had a period where I had nightmares every night. Most of the night, I dreamed that I got attacked by a small animal, like rabbits or dachshunds. I'd never been scared of animals, but then I would wake up all sweaty, and it hurt from my toes to the top of my spine. I remember a story my mum told me once. Before I was born, my mum, sister, and my dad lived in an apartment. My dad was out that night, so it was only my mum and sister. They were sitting on the couch watching TV. My mum thought she saw some man with a big hat. She thought it kind of resembled Hans Christian Andersen, the famous children book author. My mum is one of those people who explains things away, but when my sister said, "Mum, who was that?" she realized that she couldn't deny it and got shivers up her spine. One time my sister was home alone, so she invited her best friend over. They were sitting with her computer just playing around recording for fun, when they heard a woman scream, and it couldn't be outside. My sister said it came from the bathroom. They were scared, so they ran to my sister's room, and I don't know when this happened, but when they came back, a picture of my sister was on the floor and the glass was broken. My sister walked over to the computer, and they got it all on video. When she wanted to show my mum the screen was broken, we had 3 computers unexplainably break. I remember one time when I was sitting on my couch. My mum always sits between our couch and table, so I was sitting/laying behind my mum on my phone, when I heard a low crawl in front of me. I looked up and saw a shadow. It was light grey. As soon as I looked up, they disappeared. I was shocked. The apartment I was talking about where my mum and sister and dad lived before I was born. In this place, there was some creepy stuff happening too. There was once a postman who was an alcoholic who decided to end his life by hanging himself in my sister's room. When she was around 4 or 5 years old, almost every night, the postman would come to her room and speak with her. She wasn't scared, but she was scared when she saw snakes under her bed. One of my friends was watching over my dog, and when I got home, he told me that a male voice was talking upstairs. I asked if it could be the neighbor, but he told me the dogs reached, so it couldn't have been the neighbors. I don't remember everything, but it's certainly been a strange collection of paranormal events happening to me and my family for a long time. Let me start by saying we had a good and loving mother. She put us before anything and anyone. She sometimes worked 2 jobs to support the 6 of us. She did the best she could with what she had and what she was capable of at the time. I also know she had a personal passion for spiritual growth, the metaphysical, and occult sciences. I think she was addicted to the sensation of phenomenon. I think in some ways, it opened the door to the other side. It just became part of our lives, and we happily were along for her journey. When I was 5 years old, my big toe was cut off in some bicycle spokes. My siblings were told not to put me on the back of the bike without my shoes on. I guess my sister didn't get the memo. I was the youngest of 6, 4 girls and 1 boy. I slept with my sister closest to my age, But after the accident, I couldn't be in the same bed with her because I had to sleep with this thing that helped my foot stay in place, and she might have moved it in her sleep and consequently hurt me. My mother made me a cozy pad with blankets and pillows next to the couch, where I could safely sleep in the living room. At that time, we lived in a townhouse apartment in Hollywood, California. It had a big living room with very high ceilings. To the left was a wide arched doorway that led to the dining room and kitchen. All the way across the archway were rolls of film strips my mother got from her job, and they streamed down across the doorway like beads. Straight ahead was the staircase, and under the stairs in a cubbyhole was my mum's desk. To the right was a really long leather couch and my bed pad. Running all the way up the wall to the ceiling behind the couch were huge psychedelic Zodiac posters. People thought our place was groovy, late 60s, and we all saw little things here and there, nothing really scary, more odd than anything. A few times we heard running down the stairs while we were all sitting on the couch or creaking in the hall. My sister and I saw someone who looked like our grandmother standing in our bedroom doorway for a long time, just staring at us. It was too dark to see her face. My mum told me that I spoke about seeing angels, and how I said that I picked her before I was born because she was what I needed for my life. I might remember bits and pieces, but that has all pretty much faded away. But this did not. My eldest sister and I were watching The Late Show in the television room. Her on the couch and I on my pad. Everyone else was in bed. I must have fallen asleep, so she turned off the TV and covered me up and then went upstairs herself. After a while I awoke. It was so quiet. The moonlight coming through the kitchen window was shining on the film strips hanging from the dining room archway and reflected small color images on the floor. Because of this thing holding my foot still, I couldn't really move. As I was laying there, my head on my arms, my eyelids were getting so heavy. I had my arms stretched out across the floor, looking at the pretty colors from the film dancing on my little fingers, when I noticed a change. The color reflections were moving. I looked up to the archway and the strips of film were moving like a breeze hit them. I laid my head back down and watched them start to sway back and forth. Then they began swaying in sync with each other. I didn't know to be scared. They kept swaying, then all of a sudden they stopped, just like that. All of them stopped at the same time. I was very curious. I propped myself on my elbows, still laying on my back, and tilted my head. I saw a figure behind the film casting a shadow next to me. The film strips started to separate, as if someone had walked through them. It was an almost human form, but it was grey with no distinctive face. It had a male energy. I could see him as he stepped closer. I looked down and noticed he had no feet. I looked back up at him, but instead of him across from me, now he was crouching down 2 feet from my pad on the floor in front of me. I remember wondering why he had no light coming from him. I wasn't scared at that point. I simply didn't understand. He got even closer, and I leaned over my head. I innocently looked up at him. He was way less than 2 inches from my face. I should feel his cold breath on my nose, drying my eyes to the point that my tears started rolling down my cheeks, and for the first time, I felt real fear. I attempted to call for my mother, but nothing came out. My heart was beating so hard and fast I could hear it. I tried to scoop my body back, but the thing holding my foot wouldn't let me. He was leaning his whole form over my little body, and I began to sweat when he started making an inhumane noise. It started out like radio static, a low chuckle into a high-frequency long screech, then a pain piercing into my big toe. It felt like a long burning needle going into the bone. I wet the bed with fright, and I heard a loud ringing in my ears. Everything started to echo and spin. I remember seeing the room flip upside down as it all turned white and I passed out. I woke up to my mother cradling me, calling out, "Baby, baby, are you all right?" I guess she had a feeling, so she ran downstairs, but said that something told her to check on me. She never told me if she saw anything. There was blood coming out of my toe. The doctor said I must have ripped out the stitches in my sleep, even though I know I didn't move. My sister just recently told me after that happened, our mother had the apartment blessed, and that's why I never saw that thing there again. All I know is that she never let me sleep alone in the living room. In fact, after my toe healed, I slept with my mother from that point on, and she held my foot all night. This is something that happened to me when I was 12, but I remember the fear I felt then quite clearly. I was visiting my dad. He lived with his fiancée and her mum. I've always been very sensitive to spiritual things, and they have a lot of darkness in their house. That much was clear from the moment I walk in. It was unnaturally dark inside and the air was thick and hurt my chest. I know that might seem insignificant to some people, but they also had very strange artifacts in their house. I can't explain what was wrong with them, but they just gave me really weird vibes. They also had a dog, a pug named Tank. He and I spent a lot of time together and he was a very friendly dog. I never heard him bark at anyone or anything, just a really chill dog all of the time. So I think my second day staying there, my dad's fiance's mum bought me a bar of soap from somewhere. Come to think of it, I'm pretty sure she said she bought it from a secret place. It was a black bar of soap called Devil's Forest. My dad's fiancée was pagan, however I get the feeling that her mum was interested in some kind of witchcraft as well. She had unusual objects in her room, like dolls and crystals and stuff. I know that witchcraft isn't inherently bad, but I did get a particularly bad feeling from her. I thought nothing of it at the time. It was just a bar of soap. It smelled nice, and so I thanked her and put it away in my room. Later on, I was the only person at home, and I was playing outside with Tank the dog, and they had a really long backyard that ended on the Brisbane River, pretty much isolated with no people around. I was walking to the end of the yard nearest to the river when Tank stopped in his tracks and started barking at nothing. It was weird because I literally had never heard him bark before. I kept calling him, and usually he would run right over to me, but he refused to move. I felt like he was watching something, so I went over to him to try and figure out what it was, maybe a cat or something, but he still wouldn't move, and there was nothing around. He barked at an empty spot in the air, and then he just kept barking. Whatever he was staring at appeared to be moving towards the house. I honestly thought nothing of it until that second. I had left the back door open, and suddenly I felt really nervous, but I couldn't explain why. I just felt like I shouldn't have left the back door open. Tank barked at the door, and I ran over to it. He followed me and I quickly shut it behind myself, then went upstairs, and I forgot about it for the time being. Until I realized Tank refused to come upstairs with me, where my room was. Again, he was barking at nothing. I couldn't see anything. My dad's fiancée came home and was really confused as to why Tank was barking. I realized with a small sense of dread that Tank was barking specifically at my door, the room I was staying in. Trust me, there were a lot of things in that house that gave me bad vibes. But nothing compared to what I felt then. My dad's fiancée remarked offhandedly that maybe he could see a ghost, which didn't make me feel any better, especially since I was starting to think the same thing. I stayed up late that night playing video games, and everything seemed normal. until quite suddenly I felt like I knew there was someone behind me. So, terrified, I heard floorboards creaking, and I felt like whoever was there was attempting to sneak up on me, just coming closer and closer, slowly. I could feel a shiver descend my spine, and I decided that I had to turn around, because what if someone had broken in? I was going to scream if I saw something, because my dad's room was right there. I turned, and there was nothing. Yet I felt like there was something there, right in front of me. I just knew that something was just in my face, and I wanted to close my eyes, but I thought if I opened them again, then it would show itself. It was absolutely terrifying, and I ran to my room, jumped under the blankets, and left the door open. I had probably the worst night in my life. The night before, Tank had come and slept with me. We were together most of the time, but on this night he simply refused to enter my room. I awoke at 1 a.m., suddenly feeling very scared. I had the feeling that if I opened my eyes, I would see something terrible. I didn't know what, just that it was going to be terrifying. I stayed under the blankets, shivering in fear, feeling very, very cold. I prayed and prayed but couldn't shake my fear, and after hours of praying and being paralyzed by fear, I told myself the same thing I had when I thought someone had broken in. If I see something, I'll scream, and Dad will come to get me. At this point, anything was better than the terror I was feeling, so I worked up the courage for about another 20 minutes to open my eyes, and when I did, I didn't see anything. However, my eyes were drawn to the black bar of soap I had left on the bookcase by the foot of my bed. I had one very clear thought: get that thing out of here. I grabbed it, and since the bathroom was right next to my room, I threw the bar of soap in there and shut the door. The sound of the soap hitting the ground was what really made me think that it was possessed. It didn't weigh much, about the same as a stick of butter, but the sound it made when it hit the tiles was so loud. I thought I had accidentally broken something, but I was too scared to open the door. I ran into my dad's room, realized it was 5 a.m., and that I had stayed up the whole night paralyzed in fear. He had to go to work, but I stayed in his room because I was too afraid to go to mine. His fiancée gave me a teddy to cuddle, which was really nice, and I finally managed to get some sleep. An hour later, I got 2 calls, one from my mum and one from my best friend. At about 6 a.m., I hadn't spoken to either of them since the previous day. They had no idea what happened that night, and both of them called me to ask if I was okay. I asked why, and they both told me that they couldn't sleep the whole night, and that they felt something terrible had happened. I was so scared I started crying. There was no way they could have known what happened. Yet, they were both up all night feeling terrified just like me. I didn't leave my dad's room, and I kept shutting the door because it felt safe. Tank was finally with me again, and he stopped barking. I stayed there until my dad got home from work, but I was too embarrassed to tell him that I thought there was a demon in his house, and asked him to take me home. He agreed reluctantly, and while we were packing up my things he said, "Don't forget your soap." And because I was feeling much less scared by now, I went and opened the door to my bathroom to get it, which I planned to throw out the moment I got home. And I remember very, very clearly that I pegged the soap to the other side of the bathroom, so it should have landed either in or near the bathtub. But when I opened the door, it was literally right there at my feet. The only explanation is that it must have moved to the door. I freaked out, told my dad I wasn't touching the soap, and went home that day and slept fine. But my mum and I both agreed when I told her the whole story that I wasn't going back there. An entity attached itself to me for a period of 5 years. It was not a real person, and I was not able to figure out who or what it was. This is the story. The first time I noticed him was when I had moved into my old apartment on the third and top floor. I had one huge bay window spanning the entirety of the apartment. It looked out onto Main Street, and there were bus stops across the street. For a few nights in a row, I noticed the same guy dressed in dark jeans and a dark hoodie, with his hood up, staring up at my window. He was standing just to the left of the bus stop, and I guessed, okay, the dude is just waiting for a bus. But then it kept happening. Every night, during the day, on weekends. Weird things were happening in my apartment when I would notice him. Certain little electronics that would make sounds or songs would start to play. Eventually I noticed him, realized I needed something from my car, so I went down and peeked to see if he was there. But he was gone. So I go back upstairs, and he's back, just staring at me. I decided to test it out. I ran down the stairs outside, and he's gone again. I go back up, and he hasn't moved a muscle, as there isn't anywhere he could have just run off to and hidden, as it was a large and empty lot behind the bus stop. I was so freaked out, so I just kind of ignored it, until I started seeing him everywhere I went. If I was at work, I'd see him in the parking lot. Gradually, he would get closer and closer to me. He would be in the front office at work, or standing on the stairs, and eventually in the back seat of my car. I tried to ask questions or talk or get some kind of response, and nothing ever came of it. He came and went for a few years. I moved a few years after, and used to get friends hanging around, and always knew he was around because of a specific feeling I've got. Nothing malicious nor hurtful, but as soon as I got it, I knew he was going to show up somewhere. So in my new place one morning, I get up and jump to the shower. I get that feeling, okay, no problem, I'm just rinsing off, and a hand that is not my own runs through my hair. Initially my brain went, it's my boyfriend, except we weren't living together yet. He wasn't over, and I freaked out and left the house immediately. There is nothing that can convince me that I did not feel someone running their hand through my hair on my scalp. I remember the feeling to this day, and it was as real as anything else in my life. I called my sister, who was into old-timey magic stuff, and she did a little protection thing for me. It took a few more years for him to taper off. He never got that close to me again, and occasionally, but rarely, will he show up now. I still have no idea who or what it was. So my mum recently rekindled a relationship from high school. His name was Mike. Mike started to sleep at our house and had a lot of physical ailments, like diabetes, and they even thought he had cancer due to some spot on his lungs and other organs. I was caring for him while my mum was at work because he was basically paying a couple of our bills with his disability checks. He was 40, and when my mum saw him again, he was a mechanic and in perfect health. But since he was a kid, he had bouts where he stopped caring for himself and stopped taking his insulin, and suffered tremendously, of course. He was here for about a week. He would get in his car and drive around to try and help people with stuff, because I guess he felt like he needed to. He was a really nice guy. One morning I woke up and my mum went to work and Mike was out doing the usual. I'm sitting in the living room watching TV and I hear walking coming from my mum's room. We have wooden floors, so if you step on them you can audibly hear it, and at first I thought it was my dog Susie. So, I go in there and can't find the dog, and I wasn't at all worried. I sit back down and I hear it again. I'd ignore it for a good minute, but I turn around and my dog has been sitting on the sofa the entire time. I go in the kitchen and grab one of the butcher knives, and I head in there real slow, but not quietly, in case it is an intruder, so that they freak out and run away. I look on the ground next to my mum's bed, and Michael's meds and my mum's stuff are on her shelf. They've all been tipped over. Picture frames, dolls, her Bible, all nowhere to be found. The shelf, for context, was my late grandfather's. He had given that to my mum before he passed. And so I tell my mum, and she obviously thinks I'm crazy. But Mike bursts in and tells me that since he was a kid, he's had something following him around. A few weeks pass, and I'm in my living room after everyone had gone to bed, maybe at about 11 or 12. Somewhere between there, I get up off the couch and go to the restroom. I had just finished my business and began washing my hands. The water is running, but as soon as I turned it off, I could hear chairs shifting in the kitchen. I go to the kitchen, which is next to the living room, and they've all been flipped upside down. I don't believe in ghosts or demons or anything like that, but I was walking to my bedroom faster than I had in years, where I had a Bible that someone had given me once, and I just grabbed that thing and held onto it, fearing for my life at that point. The very next day, my mum's boyfriend went off to do the usual, and never came back. We don't believe he's passed, simply disappeared. My mother was obviously upset. She took his things to his mother's house and dropped it off, and that was it. Before that, I had this unwavering belief that ghosts and demons just weren't real, and everything was explainable. But I can't begin to explain what that was, or how that stuff happened. I just know it wasn't my grandpa saying he was here, but something more. So, back in 7th grade, I started studying Latin, and for some reason it was always a big deal in my family, and caused a running joke. I think I might have said something nerdy once, and that got the whole family's attention. Anyway, one Easter shortly after, I get a usual gift basket filled with mostly delicious goodies and knickknacks. This was back in Germany, so slightly different customs, and one of the gifts was an Asterix and Obelix book. Some people might not know what it is, but it's just a popular comic of Celts fighting Romans. German comics, y'all. And this book was written entirely in Latin. Firstly, I'm excited because I get a chance to put my Latin to the test. However, I quickly realize it's way out of my reading range, and thus I just put it to the side. No further thoughts given. The next day I decide to try and give it another shot, and I actually prepare with my Latin book and notes from class. But when I open the book, it's all in German. I flip through the pages trying to find where the Latin begins, but every last word is German. For a few minutes I skeptically stare at this book, trying to figure out what's happening, and after a while my brain gets frustrated and concludes that I was probably just tired yesterday and somehow associated the Romans in the book with Latin, because there's no way that my rational brain would allow me to believe in language-shifting books. Annoyed, I toss the book aside and don't think about it again. The very next day, I'm not even thinking about the book that made me actually consider the existence of dark magic. Only after a long while of chilling in my room do I notice out of the corner of my eye the stupid title of the stupid book written in Latin. I'm not as shocked as I am angry, because this stuff doesn't happen. I flip through the pages and actually jump in the air out of frustration when I find that it is all written in Latin. I go ballistic. I turn the book upside down, read it backwards, take it to another room and hold it up close to the light. But this is still Latin. It goes on for a few days switching languages from Latin to German. It also decided to get more ballsy, not even waiting until the next day to execute the shift. I myself grow increasingly angry, running up to where the book was to check the language it was currently on as soon as I get home. I also can't tell anyone about this because of what I'm going to say. Hey, can you check this book for me? I think it's magic. Could you imagine the ridicule? I eventually grew so upset with the book that my main fear was of the possibility that it would not switch languages, because then it would definitely indicate me having gone mad, and it was almost some sort of comfort to see it change. Only after one day do I accidentally let my book slip behind my bed, and I leave it there. And then do I finally get to the bottom of this. My mum had actually brought both the Latin and German versions of the books, and switched them out whenever I wasn't looking. I told you my overachieving Latin studying was the source of running family jokes, and my mum took this to a whole nother level. She never mentioned anything once. I'd figured it out, just to not give them the satisfaction, but it sure freaked me the hell out while that was happening. I've heard a lot of ghost stories growing up. I'm Italian, and my mother's family is from the south, known to be far more superstitious than people are here in the north. Ghosts, haunted houses, desecrated churches, gnomes, elves living underground. Hearing all this kind of thing is commonplace in my family, and it can be a great source of fun during holiday gatherings, especially if you're a little bit drunk. This story, however, is different, in a way that spooks me to no end. My grandparents were both born a few years after the end of World War II, and they were both really young when they moved to Milan with their parents to study and work. There they met, had a kid, and married at the age of 18. Living in such a vibrant environment, like the city of Milan was during the 60s and 70s, made them develop pretty liberal ideas. They joined the Italian Communist Party. My great-great-grandfather had been in the resistance, joined workers' marches and unions. They were and still are both atheists. My grandma took part in women's union and the feminism movement. They are not the first two people I'd think of when we are talking about superstition and close encounters with the paranormal. And yet, when they were in their late 20s, they went on holiday to Tuscany, to a small farmhouse. Everything was perfect as you'd expect in a Tuscany holiday spot to be, until it wasn't. During the night, they woke up in their rooms to the sound of steps and low chanting. They waited in the dark, surprised and terrified, as the door of their bedroom opened and a procession started to walk in. They looked like friars, clad in dark tunics with their hoods covering their faces, singing in Latin and carrying what looked like a coffin on their shoulders. They circled the bed, stood in front of my shaking grandparents until the song ended, and they left in the same way they'd come in. My grandparents waited until the spot was clear. They gathered their stuff and ran away at the speed of light, turning their car around in the direction of home, never to return again. To this day, I still haven't decided if they're playing an elaborate prank on all of us, if they took some sort of drug that night and now they're too shameful to admit it. I think LSD was pretty common back then. Or if they were the ones getting pranked by a group of hilarious people who took it way too far. It's still insane to think about, and I can't help but feel uncomfortable at the genuine fear I think I can see in my very rational grandma's eyes when she tells the story, and my granddad's complete avoidance on this subject. I was living in the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, last year. I was there to get some English certificates and take a break from law school. I lived in a neighbourhood that's not really well regarded by most people there. It's called Southport. Coming from a third world country, I was pretty sure I could handle myself, which is pretty secure compared to where I live. Before telling you guys my stories, I feel like I have to explain why the place is thought to be dangerous by most. Southport is close to Labrador, another neighbourhood, and those parts of town are well known to have a lot of drug addicts. They tend to move into abandoned places and turn them into crack houses. At least, that's what you hear. However, I think the people that tell us those things are actually trying to scare foreigners a little bit, just to make sure we're more aware of our surroundings. I mostly heard this from my teachers back in school, where I took training for my tests. So, now for the first story. Most nights I would go out with my friends to hang out at Surfers Paradise, so my daily routine would be school in the morning, then I would go to my part-time job, go back home, work out, shower, and go out and have some fun. But one day, for whatever reason, I decided to grab some takeout at a nearby restaurant and stay home to watch Netflix. We had this burger restaurant about 150 meters from the back door of the building I lived in, and this door led to a somewhat dark street where you couldn't see a lot of activity at night. It was around 8 p.m. when I left to grab the burger, and then went straight back home. But as I was returning from the store, I got this weird feeling that someone was walking behind me, which made me turn around. At that moment, I saw a guy wearing a red hoodie crossing the street. After that, I began walking faster. A few moments later, I started running to my place, thinking it was one of the crackheads that lived nearby. I must have been about 20 feet from the same back door I mentioned earlier, and I saw that weirdo run towards a garage gate and disappear. I couldn't believe what I saw. I didn't hear any noise from the guy trying to jump the aluminium gate, as it would have made a really loud noise for sure. That's when I decided to go back and check out what had happened. I left my food close to the door and started running towards the gate. When I got to the expected gate, there was an electric fence above it, which meant the guy couldn't have jumped over it. And also, I must have run back there and not even 10 seconds later he was gone. There was no way he could have opened that gate without making a noise. He simply vanished, and I'm still unsure about what I saw. This other incident is a little scary. It was my day off, and I decided to buy some stuff at the nearby supermarket in the afternoon. On my way there, I crossed paths with this old man. He was wearing a black fedora and a red button-up shirt, had really dark skin and a strange moustache. He also had a cane, which didn't seem to have much use because he was walking pretty fine. When I passed by him, I felt like I got electrocuted, and for a moment my arms felt numb. I wasn't really sure what happened, but it was bizarre. In any case, I just carried on going. There's a very strong presence in our home, and it was here last night. Let me give you some backstory. It first started 3 months ago. Our 4-year-old's first night here had an imaginary friend, and he's never had one before. I remember specifically feeling the presence before he started talking to seemingly no one. Frightening. It was like whoever this was minorly playing with him. A small interaction. But at one point I heard him ask, "Do you want something to drink?" And then proceeding to bring me a drink and ask me to open it for him. I watched. He never took a drink of it. Our thermostat would somehow be changed when my boyfriend would be back here without me. His coffee pot also kept getting shut off by the switch at the back. It wasn't me doing it, and our child couldn't reach. I at one point even paid $13 for a list of previous people that lived here to search for obituaries. It came up empty. We live in the state of Oklahoma, so you're allowed to not disclose to tenants if someone has passed away there. 2 months of living there, whatever this thing was definitely started to show a stronger presence. It often appears childlike, but at other times it does not. Things get turned off quite often. The fan, the TV, our speakers in our bedroom. Things fall off the wall a lot. It could be a coincidence, but it usually happens only on the nights when my boyfriend and I are together. I've tried to pay attention to the patterns. There have been a couple of points where it sounds like there's someone rolling a ball across the attic. My boyfriend experiences a lot of sounds. He'll be in the shower before I'm home from work and have to get out because he thinks he hears our son crying or screaming at times. I also see shadows you can't see through, more of a dark figure. I often feel as if someone is peeking around the corner looking at me, and when I look, something moves so fast my eyes barely catch a trace of it. Throughout the last 3 months, we've both also been experiencing terrible dreams, so vivid, so real, all nightmares. We even once burnt sage. Everything calmed down, and I felt as if this was when the entity started showing itself to me more as a child. In the now, we had been talking to a friend on the phone about this, and she was stressing her concern about how it seems as if this is something very dark. The dreams have been persistent since we began speaking to her. I feel as if this is angry, like it's been called out. Things keep falling off the wall while we're sleeping. I also felt as if something kept making my dreams go dark, and I would wake up with a jolt, and one time could feel such a strong presence that I couldn't move. Also, our son's teddy bear has vanished into thin air. He hasn't taken it anywhere and it's not here. I've searched the house from top to bottom. The cars, the garage, around the house. It simply isn't here. Not to mention, the attic is one of the closets that it's screwed shut. All of the carpets in the house are old. There's even carpet in the bathroom and kitchen. But there's new carpet, funnily enough, in the bedroom closets. I'm not sure what this entity is or what it wants, but I don't think its intentions are as innocent as it makes out. I used to work as a veterinary technician in an animal hospital that was generally accepted to be haunted. I mean, things would fall off the shelves out of nowhere. Strange shadowy figures would be seen walking in the halls out of the corner of eyes. The works. Well, one night I'm trying to get all the work done, and I'm feeling a little resentful because everyone else had left for the day without completing all the tasks. I'm close friends with the woman who will be opening the next morning, and damned if I'm gonna let her handle all the work by herself. We have a single hallway in the back. At either end is a door. Along one side are 4 doors that each lead into a ward. D ward was where we had the laundry machines, which were right inside the door in a short concrete hallway that led into the ward proper. Most of the rooms were around the corner, and at this time of day, we have most of the lights switched off throughout the hospital. One last load of laundry was all that remained between me and freedom, and I was ecstatic to pop the dryer open and fold it all. As I leaped into D ward, I got to work immediately. No sooner do I start folding the towels, do I hear the sound of slowly shuffling feet coming from around the corner in the unlit room. My muscles tighten. But if that's all that's happening, then I could finish the laundry and just go out without looking. For some reason, even though the light switch was within flickering distance, I had the dreaded feeling that reaching for it would somehow make things worse. Unfortunately for me, the closer I got to finishing the pile of towels, the faster the shuffling got. It sounded like worn leather shoes sliding along the concrete floor, more and more quickly, until the speed became utterly inhuman. Every hair was standing on the back of my neck as I threw the last towel into the pile and didn't even bother putting it away in the cabinets. I bolted out, set the locks, and fled from the hospital. The next day I tried testing a few things out in Ward D, but I could never quite replicate that sound that I heard. Years ago, when my mother was a little girl, she would have conversations with no one. It took a long time for my grandma to finally come to terms with the fact that my mother had an imaginary friend. She would sometimes wake up in the middle of the night and start talking. When my grandfather would go to check on her, he'd ask her what she was doing. She'd be staring at a corner in the dark, speaking to someone they couldn't see. They are staunch atheists and don't believe in anything, not even the paranormal, and hastily brushed off any idea that she could be talking to anyone than a made-up friend. Her friend was called Barry. Years later, when I was a young girl, I started speaking to someone as well, but only when I was in my grandparents' house. My grandparents by this time obviously knew that my mum's imaginary friend was called Barry. And after about the age of 8, my mother, out of the blue, just stopped speaking to him. Well, I was about 4 at the time. My ability to speak was coming along quite nicely, and I was insisting that I was talking to someone. Out of a joke, my grandma asks, "Who are you speaking to, honey?" "Barry," I reply. I kid you not. My mum said that my grandparents and her face both fell into shock. She asked me again, and I repeated the same name. They all assumed it was a weird coincidence. Then my mother tried thinking back and asked me what he looked like. I described his appearance, all dark, that I couldn't see his face, and that he was wearing a hat, almost like he were made of smoke, I said. My mum didn't say anything at the time, but years later, once I stopped seeing Barry, did she set me aside and asked me a few questions about if I remember Barry. When I tell her that of course I do, she said some things she remembered about him and tried to see if they were the same. We matched at nearly every point. She was quite afraid and asked a local priest to come and bless the house. I don't have any younger siblings yet. I wonder if they'll still see Barry if they go to my grandparents' house, whatever he is. So in Mexico, some homes have their hallways open to the front/backyard, and mostly old design now. Back when I was around 8 years old, I went to Mexico to visit my grandparents for the summer. It's a ranch house, and they have horses, cows, and turkeys. Every time I go, I sleep in this one room that's separated from the main house. Imagine a courtyard, my room on the east side of it, and the main house on the west. And running from north to south in the middle is my grandmother's garden, fenced off so that the chickens won't come in and destroy it. The entrance to the inside of the house is on the west side of the courtyard through the main house. It had a heavy wooden double door, and one night before we went to sleep, we usually pray, and that night, my cousin did not want to teach me about a certain prayer, so I got upset and wished him bad things. At 3 a.m. we wake up to the sound of a horse walking on cement. I look out the window that's facing the courtyard and it's dark. For a second, I thought the horse got out of the corral, but the dogs would have been barking. The noise of the hoofs stomping on the cement got closer, and all of a sudden we see 2 red dots moving while the horse is walking, and we jump under the covers and start praying. The next morning, I asked my grandparents if they had heard the horse walking sounds. They said no and asked why, with an "oh shit" look on their face. I told them that we heard a sound as if a horse were walking inside the house in the courtyard. "Ah, the legend," they replied. According to her and the town, there is a trail in the mountains just a few hundred feet from where my grandpa's home is that is not very traveled because, as they call it, it's the Devil's Trail. He roams about on it with his horse occasionally. So yeah, I'll never forget that. The legend might be false, but the sound of the horse walking inside the house and seeing red lights move in the dark is real, as 3 of us witnessed it. I've always grown up around people who've seen ghosts, and I believe in them. But I have personally never had an encounter except the night after my father passed away, when the ZAR 200 note went missing out my wallet. That was the last thing he gave to me. But I'm here to talk about something that just happened. About an hour ago, I was playing Sims and listening to creepy Reddit videos, which is what made me decide to share this immediately. Then I went to bed. The whole night, there was a wedding party going on nearby, and I could see the lights and cars and everything from my room. Loud music, great vibes, and it sounded like they were having a fantastic time. Then I get ready for bed, and go to the bathroom to take a whiz. Then I'm still hearing the jolly music. Then all of a sudden I hear a really low-pitched voice. Oh, that's the sound it made. And then the music stopped. I checked out the window and all the lights were off, all the cars were gone. And it was as if everything had come to a sudden halt and disappeared. To quote Keith David, I'm freaking the hell out inside, but I didn't tell anyone. I asked my neighbor about the party, and she gave me this confused look and asked, "What party?" I'm perfectly sane, and my mum commented on how loud the party was, so it definitely wasn't my mind playing tricks on me. What the hell was it? I grew up having paranormal experiences take place around me. But I think the one that sticks out to me is a fairly recent one. Last year, my ex-boyfriend gave me a light string with rose-shaped decorations over the lights. I put it up on the wall next to my bed and used to leave them on all night before they stopped working, as I'm afraid of the dark. Well, one day in mid-December around 11 p.m, I was lying in bed ready to go to sleep when I felt a weight shift at the foot of the bed. It was as if someone had just sat down. I sleep with my room completely closed and both my door and window shut, and I hadn't heard my door open, so it couldn't have been one of my parents coming in to check on me. A few minutes later, I managed to gather up the courage and sat up in bed to take a look. The loose end of the fairy lights, the one that just dangled off the wall, looked like it had someone pulling it away from the wall, and then the person was just releasing it. On its own. I swear I almost crapped myself. I stared at it for a few seconds, my heart pounding out of my chest, before I got my phone and turned on the flashlight and pointed it to it. As soon as I did that, it stopped. Needless to say, I did not get a good night's sleep after that. In high school, I was finally on a first date with a hot friend of mine. We went parking on a remote gravel road, beautiful summer night, full moon shining all over the tall corn. We were making out in the front bucket seats of my stick shift car, and I saw some shadows dancing across the front. She looked up from kissing and then looked out her window and started this blood-curdling scream. I looked up in time to see something duck down from the window. She then yelled, "There's a man out there!" I told her to roll up her window, and in one quick motion I started the car, shoved it in first and dumped the clutch. We were so hyped that the car just sat and spun out in the gravel through second gear. We finally calmed down enough to drive back to town. I knew the parking was done for the evening, and after taking my extremely distraughted friend home, I caught up with a carload of my buddies. After relating the story, we were all ready to go back and kick the dirty bushwhacker's ass. However, all we could see in the vicinity was the farmer's large German shepherd sniffing around in the ditch. I was thinking, no way. Sure as hell, the next morning, I was looking over my car, and you guessed it, large paw prints on the passenger door. I bet she scared that poor dog as much as he scared her. We laughed our asses off to this day. Guess it wasn't a ghost after all. My grandfather was a truck driver and taught me everything I know about driving, especially in snow. I used to work at a drugstore, and one night I was closing another store in our chain, and we had a snow squall that unexpectedly dropped a few inches of snow in our area. I wasn't very familiar with the area, and I had my mum's car, so I wasn't used to that either. The snow was still coming down, and I couldn't see. So I was creeping home and panicking as I saw cars spinning out all around me. All of a sudden, I saw a light in my passenger side view mirror, and I turned my head, and sitting in the passenger seat plain as day, I saw my dead grandfather. I heard him say he knew that I was freaked out by the snow, and then I heard his voice rattling off all the things he taught me about driving in the snow. I looked back towards the road, and he was gone. It was a calming experience when I saw him, and it was more, okay, Pop's here, I'm okay, instead of, oh my god, you're supposed to be dead. And I stopped panicking and got home without a problem. It was most likely just my brain or eyes or whatever playing tricks on me to get me to stop panicking. But to this day, it still freaks me out. When we first moved into the house I grew up in, I used to hear things calling my name from the opposite end of the house. Let's say I'd be in my room playing with Lego or something, and I would hear my dad calling my name from his room. So I'd go to my parents' bedroom and ask them what they wanted, and they'd always tell me that they'd never called my name. Being a little kid, I honestly started to think that they were playing a joke on me, because this happened about once every few days. Well, one night, it happened, and I went to ask them what they wanted. But right as I stepped into their room, I heard my mother's voice calling me from the living room, which is all the way on the other side of the house. It was at that exact point that I knew no one was tricking me, because I was looking at both of my parents sitting in front of me. I kind of kept this to myself, until my brother was diagnosed with partial narcolepsy. One of the symptoms of narcolepsy is apparently oral hallucinations, so I thought maybe it had to be that. I went and got myself checked, and I was completely fine. I have no idea what was calling my name all those years ago, and I still hear it at night whenever I come over to stay. When I was 9, my sister was the victim of a hit and run. This happened right up the road from where we lived, 2 houses up to be exact. About a year after her passing, I was walking across the street 2 houses up, when I heard my name yelled very loudly. I stopped and looked behind me. No one was there. When I turned around, there was a car in front of me. It was passing me, and the woman driving clearly didn't see me. She was looking at the radio. She drove past me and I finished crossing the street. There is no doubt in my mind that if I hadn't stopped, I would have been hit by her car. I looked and never saw anyone outside or at the window. I never figured out who it was who yelled my name. Could it have been an echo of my sister? This is a very sentimental story for me, and I've finally decided to share it. I don't recall the date that we moved into this lovely little house in the more suburban area of Baton Rouge. From the best I can remember, we were still unpacking a few weeks later when the haunting began, or at the very least started for myself and my siblings. I was alone at the time, in my room, not in the house, playing with my toys. when I felt a presence in the room with me. I looked up and scanned the room, finally resting my eyes on a girl standing in my doorway holding a cat. Even after all these years, I can still remember what she looked like, barefoot and wearing a yellow sundress. She smiled at me, with her turquoise eyes seeming to sparkle with cheer. Now I wasn't afraid. There was nothing to be afraid of. Certainly she was only a neighborhood girl who'd come over to visit. After all, my parents would never let just anyone into our home. And she looked sweet, completely trustworthy, more so than anyone else I've ever met. So I addressed her as I would any other visitor. Hello? What's your name? She smiled again and said, My name is Precious. What's yours? David, I replied, taken in by her French Cajun accent. This was the first time I'd ever heard one, despite living very close to Cajun Island, and it made her seem even sweeter, like a truly noble lady. She walked over and set her cat on the floor, just at the edge of all the Legos I had all around my room. Now that I finally had a good look at her, I realized she was a bit too old not to be in school, so I asked her about it. Oh, I'm homeschooled, she replied. That must be nice, I said in turn. With an even larger and happier smile than before, she reached out and rubbed my head with her palm. Oh, it's very nice. She looked at the mess of Lego in my hand. What are you making there? A spaceship, I replied enthusiastically. It didn't look remotely like any kind of ship. Could you show me how to make one? She asked. Sure. And I showed her how the blocks worked, eventually ending up with 2 spaceships. And after she saw what I had done, she went about playing with the Legos too. After a while, I felt a paw touch my arm and glanced down to see her cat staring up at me. He was so beautiful. So I reached down to stroke his fur, feeling a softness I'd never experienced before or since. Is this your cat? I don't think we have one. Of course. I like having him nearby. He's my friend. Can he be my friend? Of course he can. He certainly seems to like you. I'll stop the story here. As you can see, she was quite normal, indistinguishable from any normal kid in every way. But the haunting didn't end with nearly daily visits from my friend. Soon, we started noticing paranormal activity around the house. It was always mild, non-threatening stuff, like things moving around or whispers. There was one thing that happened from time to time though, and that was her and her cat running off bad people. Whenever someone came in who was scummy in any way, lights would flicker, or they, the visitor, would see a cat staring at them, its face scrunched up and hissing, like it was getting ready to rip their face off. We didn't have a cat at the time, and our electricity was faulty. We quickly learnt that these things only happened when questionable folk were in the house, and from what I was told a decade later, those people often ended up in trouble later on down the line. After living there for just over 2 years, we had to move to a new place, as my father found new work in a town several hours' drive to the north. I actually remember saying goodbye to Precious, and we both teared up. It was heartbreaking to leave my closest friend behind. I remember taking one last look back at the house as we drove away, and seeing her standing on the porch waving at me, clearly crying. Even over 30 years later, I can't get that face out of my memory. She was sad. So sad. And so was I. It left me a little depressed for a few months after, which my parents just chalked up to moving day blues. But we all knew the real reason. But over time, I stopped thinking about it and finally moved away from that day emotionally. It would be over 10 years later before I really put much thought into her, not because I no longer cared, but because the memory still hurt all those years later, all the way up to today. In a casual conversation with my mother one day, while my siblings were at school, as I was skipping classes to help pack up for yet another move, the benefits of being a smart child. And I brought her up. I remember my mum smiling, and she explained that Precious was a spirit. I'll never call her a ghost due to the way that people feel about ghosts. She was not to be feared, but loved. Needless to say that after hearing this, I cried. Now, not only did I realize that I had abandoned a very good friend, but I had abandoned a friend who would never be able to seek out new friends and would have to deal with whomever moved into that house. I felt wrong for a few days, but eventually decided I'd do what I could to go back. It's been far too long, and life has kept me too busy to even entertain the idea of searching out that old house. Right now, I'm busy getting ready to move into a new place, and I've already started working on figuring out how to go back. It'll take some time to save up the money and track down the exact house, let alone get the owners to let some random man into their home. Now, well, I just hope she remembers me and will come back when I visit. I would even like to try and get her to come home with me, so that I could introduce her to my kids and give her a nicer place to stay. But right now I have a mortgage, so even my greatest, closest friend will have to wait until the day that I am available. Believe it or not, that day came closer than I expected, and I made the trip down there to see what I could see. I brought with me a cheap audio recorder and my phone, but unfortunately didn't get much use on either of them. In my excitement, I forgot all about my phone. I understand that without evidence, all of this means nothing, but I felt that I should share what I experienced. The house was a mess when I got there. Most of that particular suburb had become a bit of a slum. Druggies had been using the abandoned homes as a place to squat. Luckily, my house was relatively untouched due to the spirit inside, I suppose. I felt bad that Precious's home was being used that way, but I soldiered on and entered the house, finding that it was indeed a mess, but that the mess was also pushed to the side with clear walkways. I found my way to my old bedroom, and to my surprise it was almost clean. And that's when I felt it. You know the feeling you get when an old friend you haven't seen in a while calls you out the blue, and you get that excited feeling. Well, that was me. I spun around and didn't see anything, so I called out to her. "Precious, are you there?" I felt more than I heard her answer. "I'm here, David." I dropped my recorder as I fumbled around trying to get it to turn on. I was so excited to finally see her again, and when I finally got the recorder off the floor, I hit the record button and held it out. "Precious, if you talk into this thing, I can record you." "I don't want to be recorded. I just wanted to say goodbye." This threw me for a loop. Goodbye? Why goodbye? I can't put words to the feeling that rolled over me. There was so much wrong about them. Sorrow, fear, abuse. I asked her if anyone had tried to hurt her. She said no. She had been so lonely. I would later find out that after a bit of research, the only family that lived there after my own were a pair of elderlies, and Precious never really spoke to adults, and I was pretty surprised to hear her speak to me. "Please," asked a voice in my head, "please don't leave me again." My heart stopped for a second. She sounded so sad, so hurt. But I couldn't stay. I even told her as much. I told her that I had a kid and she'd be welcome to follow me home. Hearing her say goodbye, then follow it up with, "Don't leave me," made me want to take her away so that she'd never be alone again. She was so lonely that anyone with a heart would feel for her. She told me that she couldn't. She could only be in that house or in heaven, nowhere else. So I swallowed my greed and told her to go to heaven. She didn't need to live in a drug den. She deserved so much more. Suddenly I felt pressure around my waist. She was hugging me, and I started to cry. I told her how much I missed her, and she returned those words, and then I told her to move on for a second time. She asked if I could stay. She wanted so much to have a friend again. 30 years alone had taken its toll on her. I explained to her that I couldn't. I had to be at work the following day and take care of my child. She released me and stepped back. For one fleeting second I saw her again, still dressed in one of her cute little summer dresses, still smiling at me, even though her eyes were sad. "You'll never see me again," she said. "I just want you to be happy. I'm getting old. I doubt I have much time left on this earth myself. You see, I have a few medical conditions that are going to kill me sooner rather than later, but this isn't the time nor place." She started to cry, and I was instantly reminded of the last time we'd seen each other. I wanted so badly to be able to hug her again and try to comfort her, but all I could do was tell her to move on, and I made it clear that people knew about her, that people knew she was a good girl, and that seemed to make her happy. I felt her walk away. Then I heard her voice, "Goodbye, David." Then there was nothing. Absolute silence. I spent about an hour crouched on the floor, bawling my eyes out. I'd abandoned my friend, and she had waited so faithfully for me to return. And now, she was gone. It hurt more than our first goodbye. It hurt more than every other loss I had in my entire life. After I was done crying, I looked down at my recorder. It was running, but the low power light was blinking. I remember praying to have captured something, and my later disappointment that the recorder only recorded my words and some indistinct static, which was almost as bad as having Precious leave me forever. I wanted to at least have her last words to carry with me. I want to add that I'm glad she's finally moved on. It's been over 30 years since I left her for the first time, and now, well, she's free of the house. I'd like to think she's happy. I'd like to think heaven is as good as her people say. I'll just have to wait for my turn to find out. Anyway, that's the sad end to what I've prayed would be a happy story. I wish so much that I could have helped her more. I wanted so much for her to be happy. But it's clear to me now that there was no place for her on this earth anymore. It still hurts, and it will for some years to come. When I was a young child, me and my family moved around a lot, as a parent was a coast guard. We always drove, so we stayed in a lot of hotels. Practically every time I stayed in a hotel after my family had fallen asleep, I would see a creature moving back and forth between the walls and the ceiling. The creature looked like a spider monkey, with its tail curled around its body. It moved back and forth, not smoothly, but in small jolts, almost like you would see using a flipbook. I was a bit intimidated by it, but was never stricken with fear. I saw it from as young as I can remember until age 10, and after that it just stopped. A rational adult mind tells me that my imagination as a child ran away with me. I tell myself that I expected to see the creature, and that's why I did so often. But in the back of my mind, I cannot deny that I know full well what I saw. This was a long time ago. I was 1 or 2 and my brother was 5 or 6. My mum was in the bath with the boiler in a cupboard behind her head. Suddenly, she began to hear this creepy demonic giggling and a whisper coming from the cupboard. She called for my brother, then my dad, thinking they were playing a trick on her, but there was no reply. She spoke to my dad after her bath, explaining what happened, and he just brushed it off and laughed at her. Then a few weeks later, my dad anxiously questioned my mum on what she'd heard. Turns out he heard the exact same thing she had, coming from the cupboard. My mum suddenly passed a few months ago, and within a day of her passing, my wife and I are constantly finding dimes at our feet in all kinds of strange places. Here's an example. When we talk about her, sometimes within minutes we'll find a dime on the floor or a counter that wasn't there before. I had shoveled snow off my front step last week, and after I was done, I could clearly see there was absolutely nothing on the step, as I swept it after shoveling it too, and within 2 to 3 minutes I turned around to pick up the shovel, and turned back around to see a shiny dime sitting on the step. My wife started keeping the dimes, and oddly enough, some of the years coincide perfectly to the years of our births. And trust me, I'm only telling you a few stories, but there are probably at least 30 to 40 strange appearances of dimes since her passing a few months ago. Could this be significant? When I was 6 or 7 years old, when my older brother and sister left state to go stay with our dad, I was too young to join them, so I had to stay in the room my sister and I shared, alone, which creeped me out a bit, as it was a big old farmhouse with a rusty green roof, and that room always seemed darker than the others. In the middle of the night, I woke up to something tapping on my sister's bed on the other side of the room. I rolled over and saw a white figure with black eyes sitting on the bed, tapping it, like smacking it with its hands, saying, "I know you're awake." I was in shock mode when it stood up, tilted its head before walking over and saying it again. "I know you're awake," like it knew I was looking. I hid under my blankets and closed my eyes as tightly as I could, still hearing the same sentence uttered over and over, until I woke up in the morning and rolled over to face my wall. This white blob orb looking thing flew across my wall and out my bedroom door. I remember thinking it was like a quick flying white possum. Heading out to the kitchen for breakfast, I remember being so proud of my encounter and that I survived it. I don't know why, but I was boasting it to my mum and stepdad. "I saw a ghost last night." I've been interested in the paranormal my whole life, and I think this is why. I know I was young, and it could have been my imagination with a mixture of being in the room by myself, but it felt so real. The tapping is just how our bed sounded too. I've also spent hours on the internet looking for some history on the old house, and I can't find a thing. I live in an old house that was converted into a triplex. All of the doors in my apartment push themselves open randomly, and any toiletries left on shelves in the shower are thrown to the floor. The first year or so living there, it scared me each time it happened. For example, I would be laying in my bed and the door, which would be fully closed, would push open. Nobody else was home. I'd freak out and check everywhere for an intruder. Or I would be in the living room and would hear a big commotion from the bathroom. I'd go look, and my shampoo and conditioner and body wash would be on the floor. Again, there's no one else to mess with stuff, and my boyfriend would complain to me about the same stuff happening while he was home alone. I half expected all my cupboard doors to fly open at once, and the kitchen chairs to flip upside down one day. To make matters worse, my boyfriend's son went through a night terror stage during that first year. I was chatting about it with my friend and telling her how we tried everything to help him stop having the terrors. She told me not to think she was crazy, but wondered if there was a possibility it could be something paranormal. She didn't know about the other stuff, so her saying that gave me goosebumps. I hadn't considered it before, but putting it all together scared me. We've been living here for 5 years now. He grew out of the night terrors, and I'm pretty sure all of the weird things that happened are due to pressure and temperature changes, but for good measure, I say hello to the ghost when a door opens on its own. I grew up in a really old house. It was nearing 100 years old right before I moved out, and it used to be a post office or something way back in the day. The house is creepy and big. There are 3 stories, but I was never really scared living up there or anything, although I did like to scare my friends with all kinds of made-up stories, and they always believed me too. The only weird thing that ever happened was when my parents left over a December holiday, and I had the house to myself all week. Me and my friend were bored, just sitting outside on the back porch drinking some beers. All of the doors were locked except for the one closest to us. It's just a metal frame door, fitted with glass that you can see outside of, but from the outside you only see your own reflection, like a one-way mirror. Well, while we're just chilling and talking, someone bangs on the door so hard, I was surprised that the glass didn't shatter. My first thought was that my parents came home early and caught both me and my friend drinking underage. We go into the house and there's nobody, and we looked everywhere. About 2 days go by and nothing happened. Now my room was covered in posters like most teens. I wake up in the morning, and every single one of my posters are taken off the walls and cupboards and are lying neatly folded on my chair. There's no one in the house but me, so either I did it while sleepwalking or it was someone else. To this day I have no idea what happened, and nothing weird ever occurred after that. After a shower, I walked towards my room with the door half open like I left it, but was frozen in fear as I heard footsteps and the sound of paper scrunching loudly in my room. There was even a huge shadow being cast from my room's alien lamp on the hallway floor. My first thought was, what's my dad doing in my room? Then I heard his voice laughing and chatting with friends and family in the lounge/kitchen. My next thought was, I hope everyone in the house isn't in the lounge/kitchen. I silently walk into the lounge room and could see everyone in the house was there and the kitchen casually chatting. My heart skipped a beat later at night. I went back to my room and noticed everything was in its place. Nothing seemed to have been touched, and the rest of the night was normal. I was 10 at the time, but was too scared to go into my room during that occurrence. That was over a decade ago, but I know 100% what I saw and heard, and it definitely wasn't a pet. We don't have any of them, and the footstep sounds were too loud to be something like a dog. It sounded like my dad's heavy footsteps. I know it can be explained by something rationally, but it still gives me the chills whenever I think about it to this day. The stairs in my house are so old that they creak when someone goes up them. And since everyone has a different weight and a different way of walking up the stairs, I can usually tell who it is coming up. So one night, when I'm the only person in the house who's awake, I hear the stairs creak one by one, starting at the bottom. Unfamiliar footsteps. When they reach the top, I convince myself to take a look. I check. No one there. I didn't hear anyone go down the stairs, and the hallway that connects to the top of the stairs creaks just as loudly, and the door at the bottom of the stairs is closed. There was just nothing there. Nobody used the stairs. It could be explained by the house being old, but the stairs making noise one by one in the middle of the night? That just doesn't happen.